My upload schedule has definitely turned into some form of duality of man level kind of stuff, because in the previous video I talked about 70s folk music, how whenever I listen to it, I find it to be very comforting to me. And in this video, I now want to talk to you guys about what I consider to be, in terms of its sound, as the most discomforting, cruelest, and most disturbing metal band that I've ever heard. Now, while yes, I've had more of an interest talking about like scary, disturbing, terrifying stuff within music and albums over the recent years, I try not to state this lightly within metal, mainly because, honestly, with all the metal music that I listen to, I don't really find metal to be a disturbing genre of music. From my own personal bias, I've always found metal to be way more entertaining no matter what direction it takes, and maybe it's a form of me being desensitized to it, because yeah, I'll admit, when I discovered extreme metal and death metal when I was 14 with like Cannibal Corpse, yeah, I was kind of intimidated by it, but when you start listening to it more and getting integrated in its subculture, it kind of becomes like the norm to see stuff like this. Years down the road, I would discover other metal bands and projects like Portal, Dead Reptile Shrine, KFR, and Other Tongues that are more in the experimental region of either black metal or death metal, that when I originally heard them for the first time, I was genuinely scared of what I was hearing, as they portrayed more of like these dark, abstract horror concepts, whether it be with their songwriting, presentation, and overall aesthetics, that were so out of the loop from everything else that I was accustomed to seeing or hearing within extreme metal. But again, as I kept listening to it and got more familiar with like abstract, experimental stuff within extreme metal, you get desensitized to it once again. However, there's always one or two anomalies that pushes the listener or consumer over the edge, that shatters boundaries that they thought never could be broken. And in my case, the one metal band that, honest to God, I really do feel like is truly a discomfort experience to hear, no matter how many times I listen to it, would be Khanate. From all my experiences talking to people that know of Khanate, when they express how much they enjoy them in high regards, it's not done in the traditional sense. What I mean by this is, when people tell me that they enjoy listening to Khanate or they bring them up in high regards, it's not because they get a positive experience listening to Khanate. If anything, people tend to find them in high regards because they get a negative experience from them. The emotions of misery, disgust, and cruelty, almost in the sense like they're trying to punish you for even listening to it, or to basically break you from the inside out from all of the sounds and songwriting approach that they do. It's almost like musical torture in a way, almost in a form of like anti-music. Every time that I've listened to Khanate, from the first time to present day, from any of their full-length albums, is, for one, I get this sensation of this overarching form of dread being smeared over me the moment any Khanate song starts. From there, anxiety starts to build up in the back of my head, all having to do with the fact that there are these just ungodly amounts of tension being built up minute by minute, with this extra layer of this impenetrable force of misery just crushing you down, that honestly, again, regardless of what you listen to by Khanate, it just starts to get nauseating. It's all the more unforgiving when you realize that on average, for a duration for one single song by these guys, it's roughly around 15 to 20 minutes long. How this approach is so effective in the most mind-numbing, destructive way possible is that when it comes to Khanate's approach for music, they play this experimental style of doom metal, more particularly really experimenting with the style of music known as drone. To give you a quick rundown of drone music, debatably it's not really a form of the conventional sense of music, because it really goes against the laws and rule books of what music is. For example, there's no rhythm or melody within drone music. An example of it could be something like a bumblebee when it buzzes, to the sound that your microwave makes when you turn it on to cook food. A noticeable characteristic that you'll hear with its sound is it has more of like this low registered buzz or hum with it that is dragged out for a considerably long amount of time that tends to be extremely minimalistic. It's utilized more in the sense of having this texturalized backdrop. I don't want to deviate too off course from the main topic here, but drone music has been around and utilized a lot more and longer than people give it credit for. I would recommend to do your own research online, as there's so much available data to back up where the traces are from it. But what's interesting is that since the early 90s, metal music has adopted it. One of the earliest examples of drone metal would come from the band called Earth with their 1993 full-length Earth 2 Special Low Frequency version. It's extremely minimalistic and as monotonous as something can get within the style of drone that goes on for well over an hour long. That is definitely not for everyone, especially since it's drone music that's already experimental enough. But what I find interesting, that out of all of these subgenres and niche little scenes within metal, the one style of music that really adapted it quite efficiently to their advantage would be anything that has to do with doom metal. What I've always found interesting with extreme metal when it comes to their evolutionary steps is with thrash metal, black metal, and death metal, or any other form of extreme metal that's adjacent to that, is it always seemed like the next evolutionary step was to be faster in some sense. Yet when it came to doom metal, the next extreme in the evolutionary step was to become slower. And what could really slow down the tempo for doom metal than applying drone forms of styles and music into their approach, as drone is incredibly monotonous, super minimalistic, and relies on just ridiculous amounts of repetition, where songs are normally around, again, 15 to 20 minutes long. So it kind of fit like a puzzle piece within the mentality of doom metal's respected field. So while drone doom metal is definitely not for everyone, with a very small niche fan base and scene, if you can say that it has one, how I've always looked at it with my perspective is within the evolutionary steps of extreme metal going to the next extreme, within the subgenre of doom metal, the most extreme form of it is when doom metal starts applying drone elements into their musical writing. Fast forward to the early 2000s, and this is where I feel like for metal as a whole, this was a very awkward time period, considering the fact that nu metal was bigger than ever before, and it was mainstream now. Metal became something that would appeal to the masses, something that it tried to sell as many records as possible. It was charting on the billboards monthly, and it felt like as if when it came to metal, for its, die-hard purists or whatever, it lost its foothold and its subculture was kind of shattered. Hence why I feel like during this time period you'll start to notice now that a lot of metal bands in the underground metal scene were starting to become more experimental to find, again, something special and give metal that niche little special flair that it lost, which would be the exact time period where Khanate would form. Khanate was formed in the year 2000 by 4 members, that being Alan Dubin, who is the vocalist, James Plotkin, who is the bassist, which they both worked together in a previous band called Old, which is a phenomenal grindcore band from the late 80s, along with guitarist Stephen O'Malley, who has been in a plethora of so many bands, but most notably you may know of him as the guitarist for the band Sun. And drummer Tim Whiteskida, who's also in a really killer noise rock band called Blind Idiot God. Before I go any further, one thing that's quite rare to come across with metal bands with their lineups, and this is something that Khanate has been able to achieve, is that from their beginnings in the year 2000, from the breakups and reunions that they've gone through, the lineup has not changed one single time. which, as I stated, is a rarity to see with metal bands. As for the music that you'll hear by this band from really any of their material, to be brutally blunt, and I'm not trying to state this to get this video out of the way and be lazy here, all of their albums are basically written the same exact way, that there's not much versatility to them. Again, it's super minimalistic. Even though they're labeled as a doom metal band, their musical characteristics that makes them a standout and something of like this unique entity is its origins stretch way more into the roots of drone music. It's just being portrayed with the instrumentation of metal. More often than anything else, Khanate tends to be compared to that to Sun, which makes sense considering that they both share a member. It's just when it comes to Sun, even though they're these big pioneers to that for drone doom metal, their dynamics are a bit more stretched out, I would say, because again, as slow and monotonous as it is, when you look at some of their albums, like for example Minimalist and Dimension, and you look at the guest session portion of it, it's always like at least a laundry list of individuals contributing other instruments and attributes to it, whether it be all different vocals to all different guitars, 6-string to 12-string, violins, gongs, all different electronics, that even though again it's drone, it's stretched out and it's monotonous as all hell, the dynamics are expanded upon. Whereas when it comes to literally anything by Khanate, there's no guest appearances. It's just as stripped down as it possibly can get to the bare bone, which makes it all the more monotonous and honestly to me punishing. Even though I stated all of their material is basically written the same exact way, the best place to start out with them to really get the alpha and omega of what this band is truly all about would be their self-titled debut from 2001. This album consists of 5 tracks, yet its overall runtime is a little over 56 minutes long. If you do the math there, on average each song is roughly a little over 11 minutes long. The opening track on this album, Place of Quiet, is a little over 13 minutes long, and it is just a wall of droney, abrasive distortion being played out from beginning to end. Again, as one would expect within the style of drone, it's incredibly minimalistic, it's very repetitive, and there's never any forms of comfort going to be welcome to you. It feels as if every little sound and texture you're hearing is meant almost to, inflict pain on you in some sense. As for the percussions, again, very minimalistic and nothing rhythmic. Almost utilized in the sense that they'll be executed maybe like every, other minute. Like there's not much happening with the percussions, but it just submerges you in such a really dingy, nasty environment that has always just left me in such discomfort. While all the instrumentation is really in vein as something very dystopian-esque, what really drives it home for Khanate to be just so mesmerizing in the most, again, discomforting, cruelest, and disturbing ways possible for metal for me really all stems from the vocal performance by Alan Dubin. Because whenever this man yells, it is nothing short of deranged and unhinged as it can possibly get. And that's the thing, it's such a stark contrast that they utilize to their fullest advantage, and it works wonders in the most negative ways possible. Because instrumentally, they're creating this basically really fucked up environment that is just punishing and unforgiving, that would make someone go just insane being in such a negative world. And Alan Dubin's vocal performance is like a representation of that, as if he's this character who has lived in this world, just going insane, yelling at the listener that he's a product of what this world has created. And as I stated, it is just so incredibly cruel to hear what they're able to accomplish with this approach. The following track, Skin Coat, which goes on for a little over 9 minutes long, a shorter song for Khanate, is something I would state, as odd as this sounds, their most accessible song that they wrote, because there's almost like a sense of rhythm, believe it or not, and almost forms of sludge start to creep through with some of the guitar riffs. Make no mistake about it though, even though this particular song has a bit more rhythm and it has more of a upbeat tempo with it, as I stated, there's a bit of sludge metal for a certain little kick with it, it's still as monotonous and punishing like everything else by them. Alan Dubin's vocal performance is still as unhinged like anything else that he's done. It's just, in terms of its reverb and how it's structured, it has a bit more of this accessibility, which is not really a word you should be attaching with Khanate, but it is like really the only one that comes to mind. That in terms of the more conventional ways of enjoying music, this is the closest you'll get to a Khanate song before it just turns into straight misery like the rest of the album and everything else they would do after. 2 years later, in 2003, Khanate would do a follow-up, which is my personal favorite in their discography, that being Things Viral. This album contains only 4 songs, but its overall runtime is just short of an hour long, meaning that each song in terms of average duration is roughly around 15 minutes long. Even though the dynamics between the self-titled and Things Viral really aren't any different, if anything, if we're splitting hairs here, what the band did state in interviews with their approach with Things Viral is they had more of a direction with it, and they wanted to play, believe it or not, even slower. What I find really interesting about this particular album though is in terms of its textures with its drone dynamics, it's a bit, and I'm using this like as politely as possible, expanded upon, because they utilize now at least a synthesizer to a certain extent. So you get different textures of like dark ambience and noise to a certain extent scattered over everything to give the drone aspect a little bit more flair. And I mean like the smallest smidge possible, because it still gets bombarded with the distortion of guitars being just smeared over everything. And then, of course, again, when Alan Dubin shrieks about God knows what, whether it be him losing his sanity to him about to take his own life, basically, with some of these lyrics, it will obliterate your eardrum. And that's the thing with these two particular albums that I really enjoy about this band, is, again, even though these aren't really in the sense, like, enjoyable in the convenient way, to give me such a strong reaction to it, even if it's done in the more negative sense with my emotional reactions, it's still got to be some powerful stuff for that to happen from just music alone and just using drone out of anything. And with the contrast of Alan Dubin's vocal approach, it's insanely effective, and I really do think that's as to why individuals like myself who find appreciation with Khanate tend to find it, because it gives us such negative responses, which is just, again, something really difficult to come across in art. As for the 2 follow-up full-length albums, that being Capture and Release and Clean Hands Go Foul, there's not much to state about their characteristics that I haven't been talking about over the past handful of minutes from either the self-titled or Things Viral. It's that slow, monotonous, and ultra-dense and punishing approach of experimentation, drone, and doom metal being played side by side, with Alan Dubin's vocal performance that is nothing short of deranged. It's just continuation pieces of the previous 2 that I've talked about. That's obviously worth checking out if you are enjoying the 2 albums that I've been really putting a lot more attention to. As for the history of Khanate, what I found quite interesting diving into some of their interviews when it comes to how this band operates is when they do live shows or they toured with other bands and did events, they weren't playing with other metal bands. If anything, they kind of came out of the noise scene during their time in the early 2000s, because they talked about that they were doing shows with noise projects such as Prurient and Wolf Eyes that, again, Khanate, even though they are listed as doom metal, the way they utilize their instruments and how they play live, they're doing it more of like performance art in a sense, to really utilize metal instrumentation, of course, again, guitar, bass, and drums, but play it as if they're utilizing drone instruments. As for the live shows of Khanate, from some of the footage that has been uploaded online, is they're not a metal band that's meant to jam out. You're not going to head bop or mosh or stage dive or anything like that. If anything, it's more of like this really abrasive form of performance art musically. The guitars, bass, and drums really don't do much other than just to create a wall of dissonant, droning noise that's incredibly minimalistic, which obviously I bet most of you could figure that out from just how they were playing. But really the selling point is when Alan Dubin just screams his head off is really what you're going to get visually from their performance. He's either looking like he's about to have a panic attack or a seizure from what I've seen, and it's really frightening stuff, like just how into it he gets with some of his live performances, which is something I would love to see, but at the same time I do feel like I would just dread it because it just looks like musical punishment from some of the live footage. Throughout the lifespan of Khanate, they've disbanded twice. Once in 2006, mainly having to do with the fact that their guitarist Stephen O'Malley, who found success with Sun during this time when they released their album Black One, which ended up them being able to tour with Celtic Frost. Because of his success with Sun and having more attention with that, it ended up with the band disbanding. A few years later, I believe in either 2008 or 9, they reformed, but it ended up disbanding shortly after inner conflict. And it would be until 2017 when they would reform again, and most recently in 2023 they ended up releasing their latest full-length album, that being To Be Cruel. Believe it or not, To Be Cruel is their longest album to date, clocking in at 61 minutes long with only 3 songs, meaning the average duration now is 20 minutes long per song. While I'll say this album isn't necessarily my personal favorite of theirs, I think a huge reason as to why myself and many others found enjoyment or were just in awe with its release not only was because this would be their first full-length album in like 14 years, but it's the fact that they would reform and somehow release an album and not feel like they even lost the slightest edge of what makes them so unforgivingly punishing with their approach. God, I know I'm just repeating myself here with some of these descriptions, but this album is just musical torture from beginning to end. I feel like in some sense the band kind of gains somewhat of like self-awareness for how their fan base perceives their music to make each song last roughly 20 minutes long. It goes without saying, but Khanate is definitely not for everyone. They're not even for metal fans per se. I don't even know like exactly who they're trying to appeal to. And even in their own words, when they describe their music, they state it as ultra-gravitational, hellish, brooding black doom metal with inhuman vocal constructs. Well, something like that. In some sense, I'm kind of lost for words as to what Khanate is exactly trying to do with their music. I don't know if they're just trying to push boundaries, if they've got lost within the droning dissonance that have made them into their own unique entity, or they're trying to be like the heaviest band in all of the universe, per se. I don't really know. All I know is what they have unleashed upon their listeners is something that I don't really think can be mimicked by anyone else. It's truly meant for individuals who are looking for punishment. You're looking for the most extreme negative emotions to come forth with you. If you're looking for something anxiety inducing, if you're looking for the thrill of having these negative emotions be pushed to their absolute limits, Khanate will give you that experience. And that's the thing with Khanate that separates them from the rest of the pack of any metal band I've ever heard. In the beginning of this video I talked about that metal has always been entertainment to me, regardless of the direction and form it goes under. Yet, when it comes to Khanate, which is labeled as drone doom metal, this is not entertainment to me anymore. This is something that gives me this emotional reaction of the most negative emotions that I could give off from music, I feel like. And maybe in some sense I admire this group so much because even though they're giving me these powerful yet negative emotions, they're able to do it while being just so bare bones and stripped down with their approach, whether it be their songwriting to their execution, that is just so incredibly dense with just such minimalistic instrumentation. And it's some powerful stuff, but in the most pulverizing and terrifying ways possible that truly makes Khanate something really unique when it comes to this form of music, I guess. And that'll do it for this video, guys. Like always, everything I talked about will be linked down below in the description. Really curious to know what you guys think of Khanate. And that is that. So like always, make sure you guys drink plenty of water to stay hydrated and have a great day.